So like I said before, people love to preach on this text as a text about atonement, as about the sacrifice that Jesus makes on the cross. And it makes sense because when you read this text about the seed, there's lots of metaphors of death, there's this invocation of the cross, there's this conversation about service. But what I want to tell you, and the thing that I keep noticing the more that I read this stuff, is that it really sets up that it kind of seems like we're the problem. It kind of seems like a continuation of the Noah story where people are just terrible, and thank God for Jesus for all you pieces of garbage out there. And I've heard that message often enough that that's like a normative message in Christianity, but then I remember what we read last week, where Jesus says, I did not come to condemn the world, but to save the world. And consistently throughout John's gospel, he makes it clear that he's not here to condemn. He's here to heal. He's here to encourage, to empower, and to connect. And so there's something that we're missing here if he's called to save. And I wonder, maybe it's not the stuff of our life, but the way that we've organized it, that's the problem. That when Jesus talks about the world, he's talking about that orderly structure, that understanding, that set of meaning making that we have made. And maybe it's the way that we're making meaning, not the stuff we're making meaning out of, that's the problem. See, I am convinced that following Jesus is about expanding your self-interest, not about self-denial. That a faith rooted in Christ is really about taking your self-interest and expanding it to make it more inclusive, not about denying yourself and being others-focused. And I'll tell you why. When he says we're supposed to hate our life, we need to interrogate what that really says. And in the Greek, there are two words that are translated exactly the same in that same phrase. Those who love their life will lose it, and those who hate their life for my sake will gain everlasting life. Well, that everlasting life is a different word than the previous two. The word "psiche" is the one that's translated life, about your life. And it has the flavor of the me, of the identity, of who I understand myself to be in the world, right? So when you describe yourself, somebody asked me, like, what are the 5 adjectives you would use to describe me? Someone asked me this the other day, and I gave them some, and they were like, oh, that's interesting. I wouldn't have thought of myself that way. That's the CK. That's the particularity of who you are, right? Are you funny? Are you generous? Are you kind? Are you kind of cranky in the morning? Do you really need your coffee, right? Those are your CK, your particular identity. And what they are is they're a story that you tell about yourself out of your experiences throughout your life. Your CK, your life, it's this narrative that you have about yourself. When I was younger, I had a narrative about myself that I was an ass. I believed that about myself. I talked about myself that way. You know what it did? It gave me permission to be an ass. Because that's just who I am. You got to take it or leave it, everybody. Right? It wasn't a narrative about me that called me into something. It was a narrative that just excused a bunch of terrible behavior. Right? What if that's the problem? Asking ourselves, is the narrative that I've created about myself, my CK, is it serving my dezoe, the other word for life, which means life force energy, that part of us that is expansive and alive, that part that lives inside of every seed that appears dormant, but has this magical ability, even after thousands of years hiding in a cave, to be planted and to germinate and sprout and grow life. This incredible God energy. Is the story I have about myself serving my experience of life force energy, or is it getting in the way? This is actually the question I think Jesus is posing in this statement. Because if you love your narrative about yourself, you'll lose it. Because something will happen, and it'll break it. The whole story of Inside Out 2 is about that very message. I encourage you to watch that movie. If you don't have it on your plans, we'll watch it together in September. But if you're willing to let go of the story you have about yourself for the sake of following Jesus, he's always going to lead you into that place of encountering that life force energy, that abundant, growthful place. And maybe you'll reform a new narrative about yourself that helps you get better contact to that. In fact, I think that's his whole message all the time. The problem isn't you. You're not a problem. You are a beloved child of God. But what you think about you, what you think about other people, it's getting in the way of that stuff. So maybe we need to change some of that. That's what confession is really all about. Where have I accepted a narrative about myself that allows me to continue to do harm? Can I name that? Can I own that? Am I willing to turn towards the light or not? I'm convinced that the vision that Jesus has for us is a vision of expanded self-interest, not self-denial. But then this weird thing happens in this scripture, right? The Greeks show up. Now, some commentators did a poor job of explaining this because they're like, oh, they're probably Greek-speaking Jews. No, if you get into the text, you see that the word there that's used for Greeks is Hellenes, which means Greek people, not Greek-speaking Jews, which has a different word in Greek. So these are not Greek Jews who are there for the festival because they're obligated by the systems and structures or by their personal piety or whatever. They're non-Jewish people that are getting a vibe that something important is happening. Maybe it's because they recognize that this whole structure of empire is a problem. And the ritual of Passover is about God protecting God's people from empire. And they're like, ooh, I need me some of that. I want some of that. Can I get in on that? I'm not a Jew. I'm not with all your stuff, but that, I need that. And you notice that when these Greeks show up, they go to Philip and Andrew, who coincidentally, not coincidentally, obviously, are the only two disciples in the New Testament who are always referred to by solely Greek names. They are Greeks. It's possible that they are not actually Jews, that they were born Greeks and they identify as Greeks, and perhaps they had some important mission to the Greek Hellenized, non-Jewish population, the Gentile population. We just don't hear a lot about them. But it's important that these are the two that come and bring this to Jesus. And Jesus doesn't say, yeah, we should talk to them. We should sit down and hash it out. Why don't you invite them to table? Because we're about to have Passover meal. The triumphal entry has just happened. He doesn't do that. He says, now's the time. Now's the time for the really bad stuff, the hard stuff. Now's the time for me to be lifted up. Now's the time for me to die. Why? Why, when the Greeks roll in, the non-Jewish people, why is it then time? Why is this necessary now when the people that aren't Jewish are starting to get in on the movement? Well, here's the thing about being Jewish. I mean, who am I, right? I just want to start by saying, I'm full of crap, and don't believe me, go do your own work. But what I have learned is, one of the central things about being Jewish is that we were slaves in Egypt. That there is a message that is repeated throughout the 3 pilgrimage festivals that's all about not getting to the promised land, not God bestowing blessings on us, but that we've been through some shit. And here we are. We still are, and God is still with us. But we were slaves in Egypt. Now, what does that message mean? It means that every person that we encounter, we are not better than because we've been there. It's a we message. It's a we message against empire. It's a we message against domination. It's a we message against self-aggrandizement. It's a central and core message to Judaism. It is an important identity statement. We were slaves in Egypt, generation upon generation upon generation. That experience is a now experience, not just a then experience. And these Greeks don't have that. They don't have that. In fact, who knows if they're even Greeks? Maybe they are maybe they're Gauls. Maybe they're from one of the many communities that was dominated by Roman imperialism. Maybe they're white people who don't have a history, who don't know where they came from, who don't know their traditions, don't know their cultures, don't know their foods, but now exist within empire. See, that's the protection, I think, that Jesus is trying to invite us into, is this new sense of we. Because he says, now the ruler of this world will be cast out. Well, what does that mean? Well, who is the ruler of this world? Are we talking about Pontius Pilate, who's going to reign over his execution? Well, he's not really in charge. I mean, he's in charge as much as he gets to murder you, but he's got people over him, and people over him. Is Caesar the ruler of this world? Sure, maybe, but who's driving his life? See, John has this polyvalent recognition that the ruler of this world may be these petty tyrants who operate in the human world, and maybe these nefarious forces that are arrayed against God, that are empowering and emboldening and leading these people that are doing this work. And Jesus is pretty clear, I think, that it's this new sense of we, this expanded self-interest, that will actually unseat the rulers of this world. I was just listening on the way in here, forgive me, this probably sounds weird, but I was listening to summaries of the book Mein Kampf, the book that Hitler wrote while he was in jail in 1925 and 26 after he tried to do a takeover of the government in Munich in 23. I was listening to these summaries because I've never read it. It's very long and I don't really want to waste my time with that propaganda. It's actually a book about why propaganda is so important, which is interesting because it became a very useful piece of propaganda. But the message is really about, we need more authority and more structure, and we need consolidated power, and we need a strong leader. I wonder who we're going to pick for that. We need somebody to do it, somebody who's got clear vision of who's the problem. Gosh, let me think about who that should be. But it centers on this idea that I can decide for the we. That we need to give up this idea of we, because there's some people who deserve to be we and they get to be citizens, but then there's other people that they should just really be subjects, because they're not actually good enough to be part of the we. I always thought it was ironic that he really specifically names, who should be in charge? Well, they should be blonde and have blue eyes. And I'm looking at pictures of this dude like, did everybody skip that part of the book? Anyway. See, here's the thing about self-denial. What word does it start with? Self. If you're really interested in self-denial, who are you thinking about all the time? Yourself. I think that self-flagellation and these performances of piety, all they are is really about looking good, feeling like you're doing it right. I'm so bad. Poor me. Oh, at least I'm whipping myself. Oh, look at those marks. Those are great. Right? Let me show how invested I am in denying myself. It just reeks of this false humility. Right? This performative piety, and Jesus warns about this. We read this every Ash Wednesday. Do not pray in public with long, rambling prayers like the hypocrites do, but go to your closet in private and pray. And your Father who sees you in private will reward you. For they already have their reward. Right? This whole message of self-denial is fundamentally at odds with the Christian message. And in Hebrews chapter 10, chapters 9 and 10, really, the author there is writing to a Jewish community about making sense about Jesus. And what he talks about in Hebrews 10 is why we don't have the sacrificial system anymore. And it's complicated, and I encourage you to read it and think about it and read some commentaries on it. But he basically says Jesus is the final sacrifice. We don't need to do sacrifice anymore. And I've been thinking about this, maybe we need to stop being sacrificial. Because maybe being sacrificial is about demonstrating our piety to others. This is so hard for me, but I'm going to give it up for you. It has a condescending tone to it. What if instead we think about expanding our self-interest? Because if our self-interest is expanded, it's in our self-interest, it's not necessarily a sacrifice, it's a commitment of resources towards something that we want. But sacrifice has this elevating the personal and making it all about me and how hard this is for me, as opposed to this is a thing I'm committing to because it's for us, because it's part of the world I want to live in. This is creating a reality that is a gift to me, to us, to God, that I get to be part of. And I'm going to commit my resources, my time, my energy to it, not as a sacrifice, because God, it's so hard for me, but because this is the world I want to live in. This is the community I want to be part of. The vision of Jesus is a vision of expanded self-interest. And I really do believe that individualism is a product of a people that don't have a history. Individualism is a product of whiteness and white supremacy. Individualism is a product of these things that separate us from history and culture and identity. And you can tell the message of individualism has everything to do with where you're going and nothing to do with where you're from. Right? Here you are, pick yourself up by your own bootstraps, let's get this done, let's go, forget wherever it is, here you are right now. Like, let's not think about that. Often, let's not think about all the crimes that were committed and the exploitation that got us to the wealth that we have now. Let's just start from zero, everybody. Right? Well, individualism denies all the shoulders that you stand on. Individualism denies all the debts that were paid, that are maybe still owed in order to get you here. But the other thing that I think people don't think about is individualism and that messaging also means that the next generation is going to forget you, just like you forgot the generations behind you. And I think we don't think about that part very often. We think about like, all right, I'm my own person and I'm going to make a future for me and my family, and I'm going to inculcate them with the same ordered structure of the world that I have, which means that they're going to try to run as fast away from me as I tried to run away from them. Shit. Right? It doesn't feed us. It feeds us great when we're here, but when it's out in front of us and now we're obsolete and irrelevant, well, that feels like the CK that's not serving the Zoe. That feels like the way of organizing reality that doesn't lead to abundant life. Following Jesus is about joining that flow of history, about seeing ourselves as part of this greater thing that's been going on since before we were and will continue to go on after us. That the seed dies in the earth so that it can produce abundant grain. It's about letting go of this sense of like, I'm doing it for me, and recognizing I'm doing it so that this is what exists. And you know what? Some of us, we will get to taste. In fact, all of us at various times will get to taste the fruit of that labor. You'll invest in being part of community and you'll see some of it happen. And it will taste so good. But so much of it will happen after you. So much of it will happen in these systems and structures, or it'll happen outside of you. You'll give gift and you'll be kind and you'll welcome people in and you'll never see the effect of it, right? But we don't do it because we want to reap the rewards. We're not planting in our own field. We're planting because we want abundant and verdant space within the barren places. An empire wants us to control and consolidate. It's all for me. It's all for my people, however I define that. And Jesus is like, well, sure, let's just have me be part of we, be part of us. Get bigger. This last piece in this about the light, he knows it's going to go away. He knows that the light is with us just for a little longer. And I've been wondering about this. Like, does that mean that we're in darkness after he's dead? Forever? But then I was thinking about when you get up in the middle of the night to go use the bathroom, and I don't know about you guys, but sometimes you just switch on the light for a second and like plan your route and then turn the light back off, right? The light's with you for a little while, walk while you can see. That doesn't mean that when you're in the dark, you don't remember what you encountered when the light was on. You actually have to kind of work harder to remember, but hopefully you don't trip over the fan and run into the door on the way to the bathroom. I'm sorry for this belabored metaphor, but I think it's probably relevant. It's certainly relevant to me.
You're so good at it.
That when we have these encounters with that expanded sense of self-interest, it's not going to last forever. We're going to go back to our petty selves, right? We're going to lose it. Somebody's going to be a jerk, and we're going to forget you, you're not in my we. Right? We're going to have these feelings. It's impermanent. But we can remember when we knew. We can remember when we felt it. We can remember when it was real. And that's that piece I think you're talking about that practice, that resilience for when it's harder. Do I remember? Do I know about following Jesus? Do I know that the we is bigger, more powerful, more inclusive, and more in my self-interest? Even when this sure doesn't feel like it. I want to leave you with a quote. I was reading an article in preparation for today. And the article is called God Suffers With Us. It's from the Religious News Service. It was published a couple of months ago. And it's the author is commenting on the work of Otto Weiss, who was a prisoner at Theresienstadt, which was in the Czech Republic. He died in Auschwitz in 1944. He was writing a book with his daughter as a gift for his wife while he was in this concentration camp, and she was illustrating it. And the title of it is, "And God Saw That It Was Bad." So I just want to read this little excerpt from this. He's commenting on this book and also looking at the conflict in Israel and Gaza, and thinking about the relationship between the two. So where was God the night of the attack from Iran? God was not micromanaging the Iron Dome system. God was with those Israelis who huddled in fear. When they felt fragility, that was God. When they felt hope, that too was God. And where is God now? In the words of poet Alicia Ostraker, God is, quote, reduced to a hostage among hostages. I think of the hostages still alive in Gaza. I think of the Passover that they did not have, wondering if they even knew that it had been Passover. Wonder if they had even seen daylight over the past half a year. I think of their fear. I think of their hope. I think of their courage. God is in that fear. God is in that hope. God is in that courage. Quote, "And God saw that it was bad," Otto Weiss wrote. It is bad. It is very bad. God is in the hope that it will get better. And God is in the present affirmation that God is not done with us, the Jewish people, and that while Jews will die, the Jews will always live. This is the message that Jesus was trying to impart to the Greeks, who empire had stolen their history, to say, we were, we are, we will be, and God will be with us.